My ex-husband, the man who abandoned our daughter 17 years ago to avoid paying child support, WALKED into her funeral demanding a share of her $20 million company. He thought he came to claim money. He had no idea he was walking into a plan my daughter designed while SHE was dying. If you believe that walking away has no consequences, stay with me. And if you're a woman who has ever raised a child alone while someone else disappeared, please like and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this are not just stories, they are lessons. My name is Isabella Morno. Most people call me Bella. I am 64 years old, a former public school principal, and for 17 years I was a single mother to the most brilliant human being I have ever known, my daughter Lucia Morno. Lucia was 24 when she died. A cybersecurity prodigy. Founder of a healthcare encryption company valued at $20 million before she was old enough to rent a car without extra fees. She battled late-stage lymphoma with the same discipline she used to write code, quietly, strategically, without theatrics. Her father, my ex-husband Adrian Castillo, is 52, charming, polished. The kind of man who knows how to smile while calculating. 17 years ago, he terminated his parental rights to avoid paying child support. He chose freedom over fatherhood. He chose ego over responsibility. And the morning of my daughter's funeral, he chose money over dignity. I saw him before he saw me. St. Gabriel's Cathedral was full. Lucia's colleagues from her startup filled the front pews, engineers, analysts, hospital administrators whose systems she had protected from cyber attacks. Naomi Reed was there too. Naomi is an investigative journalist who had profiled Lucia twice for national tech publications. Sharp mind, sharper instincts. She understood narrative warfare, something my daughter had mastered in ways I did not fully understand until later. Talia Brooks stood near the aisle. She is 29 now, but at 16 she was one of the first abandoned children Lucia quietly funded through therapy and scholarships. Today she runs Lucia's foundation. Fiercely loyal, fiercely composed. And then the doors opened, heavy, deliberate. Adrian Castillo walked down the aisle in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than my first year's salary as a teacher. He did not look broken. He looked rehearsed. 17 years of absence. No birthdays, no graduations, no hospital visits during chemotherapy. And there he was, stepping into the center aisle like grief was a stage he could perform on. He paused halfway down the aisle, scanning faces to see who recognized him. Some people nodded politely. They assumed he was a grieving father. That is the advantage men like Adrian rely on. Assumptions. He slid into the pew beside me as if 17 years were a minor scheduling conflict. Bella, he whispered, using the nickname he forfeited the right to use long ago. We need to talk about Lucia's estate. Not I'm sorry. Not I can't believe she's gone. Estate. I kept my eyes forward, fixed on my daughter's casket. Polished mahogany, closed, too small for a life that large. Her name, I said calmly, is Lucia. He exhaled sharply. Of course, Lucia. Look, I know this isn't the time, but I have legal standing. I'm her biological father. Biological? The word men use when they have nothing else. I turned slowly to look at him. You terminated your parental rights in family court, I said evenly. You made yourself a legal stranger to her. His jaw tightened. That was complicated. No, it wasn't. It was $300 a month, that was the number. $300, that is what he decided fatherhood was worth. He leaned closer. I'm not here to fight, I just want what's fair. Fair, I almost admired the audacity. Character is revealed when no one is watching, I told him softly. You revealed yours a long time ago. At the pulpit, the priest began speaking about Lucia's brilliance. About how her encryption system protected patient records across 3 continents. About how she continued coding between chemotherapy treatments. Adrian nodded solemnly, performing grief. But I knew something he did not. Lucia had expected him. 2 years before her diagnosis, when her company began to scale, she came to me one evening and said something I did not understand at the time. Mom, she said, if someone betrays you, study them. I remember laughing gently. I prefer to move on. She shook her head. That's why people like him keep winning. You moved on. He kept operating. I did not realize then that she had already hired someone, that she had already begun documenting patterns, that she had already built layers I would only discover after she was gone. Back in the cathedral, Adrian shifted in his seat. My lawyer will be contacting you, he murmured. We can settle this privately? There it was, not grief, strategy. He believed he could outtalk consequences the way he always had. He did not see Naomi Reed watching him from across the aisle, her expression unreadable. He did not notice Daniel Hargrove standing quietly in the back near the side door. Daniel is a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime. Calm, surgical, he does not bluff, and he does not attend funerals casually. Adrian thought he was entering a grieving mother's house to negotiate money. He did not understand he was stepping into a structure Lucia had engineered while she was dying. After the service, guests formed a line to offer condolences. Adrian positioned himself strategically near the exit, intercepting Lucia's investors. I'm her father, he introduced himself more than once. I watched carefully. A woman learns to observe when she raises a child alone. Observation keeps you ahead. Talia approached me quietly. He doesn't know, does he? She whispered. No, I replied, not yet. Adrian finally cornered me near the courtyard. Bella, we can do this the easy way. I'm bankrupt. Linda left. My business collapsed. I need this. Need, as if Lucia's death were an opportunity. You always need something, I said, but you never needed her. His face hardened. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said. Lucia did. And that is when something flickered in his eyes, confusion, fear, just a hint. Because he did not know what she had done. He assumed inheritance was paperwork, numbers, signatures. He did not understand that my daughter, my quiet, strategic, brilliant daughter, had turned her last 2 years into research. Documentation, insurance, protection. That night after everyone left, I went into Lucia's home office. Her desk was immaculate. Labeled folders, encrypted drives, a sealed envelope addressed in her handwriting. For Mom, if he comes. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from realization. She had known. She had prepared. And whatever was inside that envelope would explain why Daniel Hargrove attended a funeral for a young tech founder and why Naomi Reed had cleared her publishing calendar for the next month. If you think this story is about inheritance, you're mistaken. The money was never the real weapon. The truth was, and Adrian Castillo had just stepped directly into it. In the next part, I will open that envelope and you will understand why some daughters don't seek revenge. They build consequences. When I closed Lucia's bedroom door that night, the house sounded different. Grief changes acoustics. Every step echoes louder. Every drawer sliding open feels deliberate. I sat at her desk, the same desk where she built a cybersecurity company worth $20 million while enduring chemotherapy, and I stared at the envelope labeled in her precise handwriting. For Mom, if he comes. She didn't write if he asks. She wrote if he comes. That word told me everything. Lucia Morno, my daughter, had not hoped her father would stay away. She had anticipated his arrival like a scheduled storm. I have always believed that character is revealed when no one is watching. Lucia believed something sharper. If someone betrays you, study them. I broke the seal slowly. Inside were 3 items: a flash drive, a notarized copy of Adrian Castillo's voluntary termination of parental rights, and a letter. I already knew about the termination, but seeing the official seal again brought back the courtroom memory. 17 years ago, when my ex-husband Adrian, charming, persuasive, parasitic, chose to sign away his legal claim to our daughter rather than pay $300 a month in child support. $300. That was the price of fatherhood to him. The letter was short. Mom, if you're reading this, it means he came for the money. He won't come for closure. He won't come for apology. He will come because he's desperate. Desperation makes predictable men sloppy. The flash drive explains everything. Trust Naomi, trust Daniel, and please don't feel guilty for what happens next. I built this for protection, not revenge. Love, Lucia, protection. That word steadied me. I inserted the flash drive into her laptop. A secure interface opened automatically. Lucia's encryption system. Password prompt. Underneath it, a hint. The first thing he refused to give. I didn't hesitate. I typed 300. The screen unlocked. What opened was not chaos, it was architecture, folders labeled with dates, financial records, affidavits, investigative summaries, a master file titled Castillo Pattern Analysis. My daughter had built a case study on her own father. The first video file began playing automatically. Lucia appeared on screen, thinner than she had been before chemo, but composed. "Mom," she said calmly, "Adrian Castillo doesn't abandon randomly. He calculates. He identifies financially vulnerable women, integrates into their lives, extracts resources, and exits before legal exposure escalates. It's a cycle, I mapped it." The screen shifted to a timeline. After leaving us, Adrian had lived with a woman in Phoenix for 4 years, transferred funds from joint accounts into Shell Consulting Services, then disappeared. Then another in Dallas, then one in Miami, each pattern identical: emotional attachment first, financial entanglement second, withdrawal third. Lucia's voice continued. "He believes he can outtalk consequences. He relies on charm until paperwork surfaces, so I collected paperwork." I felt something shift inside me, not rage, not shock, recognition. I had spent my life as a principal managing systems, navigating power structures. My daughter had inherited that instinct and sharpened it into a blade. The next folder contained forensic accounting reports. Not prepared by Lucia alone. Prepared in coordination with Daniel Hargrove, federal prosecutor, white-collar crime specialist. Calm, surgical, a man who lets criminals bury themselves with their own explanations. I remembered the first time I met Daniel 6 months before Lucia died. She introduced him as a friend who understands documentation. I had assumed he was advising her on cybersecurity compliance. I understand now that she was advising him. Embedded within the archive were tax discrepancies, identity inconsistencies, wire transfers routed through questionable accounts. Lucia had not merely studied her father emotionally. She had audited him financially. Another folder, media contingency. That was Naomi Reed's domain. Naomi, the investigative journalist who had profiled Lucia twice, was more than a writer. She was a strategist. Lucia had provided Naomi with encrypted access to a conditional publication package. If Adrian filed a claim against the estate, a long-form investigative exposé would publish within 48 hours. Headline pre-drafted. Evidence cross-referenced, sources verified. Lucia had understood something I taught hundreds of students: systems respond to pressure. She simply applied pressure at the right points. I leaned back in the chair and whispered into the empty room, "You were ready." My phone vibrated. "Naomi, you opened it, didn't you?" she asked. "Yes." A pause. "He contacted a civil attorney this afternoon," she said. "Filed an intent to contest. He's moving quickly." "He always does," I replied. "He mistakes speed for power." Naomi exhaled softly. "If he proceeds, the article goes live. I've held it for 2 years. It's airtight." "Did she ever hesitate?" I asked. "Not once," Naomi said. "She said, if he stays silent, we stay silent. If he moves, we move." That was Lucia, quietly strategic, never loud, never reckless. After I hung up, I opened the final file. Foundation's Safeguard. Talia Brooks had written part of this. Talia, now 29, once a terrified teenager Lucia funded through therapy when her own father disappeared. Lucia had structured her company's inheritance into a protected trust. The funds could not be accessed by biological relatives with terminated parental rights. Instead, they flowed automatically into the Morneau Foundation: scholarships, therapy grants, legal assistance for abandoned families. Adrian thought he was chasing $20 million. In reality, he was chasing a locked vault with cameras pointed at him from every angle. The doorbell rang the next morning at exactly 9:12 a.m. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know. Adrian stood there with a different lawyer. Younger, less seasoned. Confidence stretched thin over uncertainty. I opened the door calmly. "Bella," Adrian began, forcing composure, "we're filing a formal contest." "Of course you are," I said. "Come in." We sat at the dining table where Lucia once did homework alone while I worked late shifts. Adrian leaned forward. "Biology matters. Documentation matters more," I replied. His lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Castillo maintains there may have been procedural irregularities in the termination." I slid the notarized copy across the table. "There were none." Adrian's jaw flexed. "You think you can intimidate me?" I almost smiled. "No, I don't intimidate, I inform." He stood abruptly. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." I met his eyes steadily. "Actually," I said quietly, "Lucia did." For the first time he hesitated, just a fraction, a crack in confidence, because he did not know how much she had seen. He did not know that Daniel Hargrove already had a preliminary file. He did not know Naomi Reed had a publication queued. He did not know Talia's foundation board was prepared for litigation. He believed he was negotiating with a grieving mother. He was not. He was triggering a system. As he walked out, he turned and said, "You're making a mistake." I shook my head. "No, Adrian. 17 years ago, you did." After the door closed, I stood in the silence and realized something important for every woman listening to this. Strength is not volume. It is preparation. Lucia did not scream. She structured, she did not threaten. She documented. And now, as Adrian moves forward with his claim, there is one detail he still doesn't know, the detail that will shift this from inheritance dispute to federal exposure. And when that piece surfaces, he won't be arguing over money anymore. He'll be explaining himself to someone who doesn't negotiate. Adrian Castillo has always believed that if he can sit across a table from you, he can win. That eye contact is leverage. That confidence is currency. What he never understood is that confidence without documentation is just noise. The settlement conference was scheduled for Tuesday at 2:00 p.m. downtown. Neutral office space, glass walls, polished table. The kind of room designed to make people feel smaller than their problems. I arrived 10 minutes early with Naomi Reed and Talia Brooks. Naomi carried nothing but a slim leather folder. She looked like a journalist attending an interview, not a woman holding a detonation device in written form. Talia stood beside me, composed, hands steady. 17 years ago, I learned how to hold my posture in rooms that underestimated me. I taught that lesson to Lucia, she perfected it. Adrian entered 5 minutes late with his new attorney, third one in a week. That alone tells you something. His suit was sharp again, confidence restored. He mistook last week's hesitation for a temporary inconvenience. He smiled at me. "Bella, we can still handle this quietly." I folded my hands calmly. "We are." His attorney began speaking about procedural ambiguity and biological claims. I listened without interrupting. Former principal, years of listening to parents explain why consequences shouldn't apply to their children. Patterns repeat. When he finished, I slid a single document across the table. Certified termination of parental rights. Judge's seal. Adrian didn't look at it. "We've discussed this," he said. "It can be challenged." That's when Daniel Hargrove entered. He didn't rush. He didn't introduce himself with theatrics. He simply took a seat at the far end of the table and placed a thin file in front of him. Daniel Hargrove, federal prosecutor, white-collar crime division. Calm, surgical. Adrian's attorney stiffened slightly. "I wasn't aware this was a federal matter," he said carefully. Daniel replied evenly, "It isn't yet." Silence has weight when delivered correctly. Adrian shifted in his chair. "What is this?" he asked, trying to sound amused. Daniel opened the file. "Mr. Castillo, over the past 12 years you've operated under 3 separate tax identification numbers. 2 belong to individuals who have filed identity theft reports." Adrian laughed lightly. "This is ridiculous." Daniel didn't blink. "You've also transferred funds across state lines using shell entities connected to women you were in domestic partnerships with." Naomi slid her leather folder across the table. "We have recorded testimony from 2 of those women," she said calmly, "and bank records." Adrian looked at me, not them. "You did this?" I met his gaze steadily. "Lucia did." He didn't understand that yet. He still thought this was emotional retaliation. He leaned back, folding his arms. "You think you can scare me into walking away from my daughter's inheritance?" Naomi spoke again, voice even. "If you file your contest formally, the investigative article goes live within 48 hours. It details financial exploitation, identity inconsistencies, and court records. It will be national." Adrian's attorney went pale. "What article?" Naomi turned her laptop so he could see the draft headline. It wasn't dramatic, it was precise. "Serial financial manipulation and the inheritance claim, a pattern of exploitation." Facts, dates, receipts. Adrian's smile faltered. "This is blackmail." Daniel's tone sharpened just slightly. "No, this is documentation." I watched Adrian closely. "That is something women must learn. Watch the shift, not the volume." His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped the table. He was calculating exit strategies. He always calculates. What he had not calculated was Lucia's timing. "There's more," I said quietly. Talia pressed a button on the remote. The screen at the end of the conference room lit up. Lucia appeared, not frail, not fragile, composed, recorded 2 weeks before she lost the strength to sit upright. Adrian, she began, she did not call him dad. If you are watching this, it means you decided to pursue money instead of dignity. Adrian inhaled sharply. He hadn't expected her voice. You taught me something valuable when you left, Lucia continued. You taught me that abandonment follows patterns, so I studied yours. The screen shifted to a visual timeline, relationships, financial transfers, withdrawals. Lucia's cybersecurity mind had turned emotional trauma into structured analysis. You believe conversation can erase paperwork, she said calmly. It cannot, Adrian whispered. Turn it off. No one moved. You also believe that desperation entitles you to resources you did not help build, she continued. It does not, she paused. Even on screen, she had presence. Here is your choice: withdraw your claim immediately and this remains a private lesson. Proceed and the evidence transfers to federal review. The screen went dark. Adrian stared at the blank reflection of himself. You coached her, he said to me. I raised her, I replied. Daniel closed his file gently. If you withdraw the contest today, the federal inquiry pauses pending further review. If you proceed, it escalates automatically. That was the piece he didn't know. Lucia had structured a conditional trigger through Daniel's office, not an official charge yet, but a prepared referral package, everything cross-indexed, ready. Adrian looked around the room and realized something for the first time. He was not in control of the narrative. Naomi spoke softly. You're very good at private manipulation. You're not built for public exposure. That landed. His attorney leaned toward him urgently, whispered, calculations happening at speed. Adrian's breathing changed. Shallow, you would ruin me, he said, almost disbelieving. I shook my head. No. Your choices did that? And here is the lesson for every woman watching: justice does not require screaming. It requires structure. Adrian reached for the pen. His hand trembled slightly. He signed the withdrawal of contest. The room remained silent. No celebration, no gloating, just completion. He stood slowly. This isn't over. Daniel looked at him evenly. It is, if you make it so. Adrian walked out of the room without another word. The door closed behind him with a softness that felt final. Talia exhaled for the first time in 10 minutes. Naomi closed her laptop. Daniel gathered his file. He won't stop entirely, Daniel said quietly. Men like him rarely do. I know, I replied, because this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about exposure. And something in Adrian's eyes before he left told me he was not finished trying to protect himself. What he doesn't know, what he still doesn't know, is that Lucia anticipated that too. There is one safeguard left, one final layer she built that none of us have activated yet. And if he makes one wrong move, it won't be a conference room next time. It will be a courtroom. And Daniel Hargrove doesn't negotiate in court. There is something about men like Adrian Castillo. They mistake silence for surrender. 2 days after he signed the withdrawal, after he walked out of that conference room believing he had narrowly avoided disaster, he made the mistake Lucia predicted he would make. He didn't file another claim. He didn't call me. He didn't contact Naomi. He tried something quieter. He tried to move money. I learned about it at 6:14 am. My phone vibrated while I was making coffee in the kitchen Lucia designed during her first profitable year. Talia Brooks, 29, former abandoned child, now director of the Morno Foundation, rarely calls before 8. Bella, she said without greeting, there's been an attempted access request to one of the secondary trust accounts. My grip tightened slightly around the mug. From an attorney proxy in Nevada, filed under a holding company connected to Adrian. Of course it was. Adrian never charges directly, he layers, always has. That is the difference between reckless criminals and strategic parasites. They hide behind paperwork. What he didn't know is that Lucia built her trust the same way she built her encryption software: multi-layered authentication, cross-state alerts, behavioral triggers. Was anything transferred? I asked calmly. No, Talia said, but the attempt activated the Red Protocol. Red Protocol. I closed my eyes briefly. I had read about it in Lucia's files but hoped I would never hear it spoken aloud. Red Protocol was not emotional retaliation. It was escalation architecture. When I arrived at the foundation office, Naomi Reed was already there. Investigative journalist, composed, laptop open. He tried to test the perimeter, she said. That's not desperation, that's ego. He thinks if he doesn't say my name, it won't connect back to him, I replied. Naomi nodded. Unfortunately for him, shell companies leave trails. Daniel Hargrove joined us 20 minutes later. Federal prosecutor, white-collar division, calm enough to make criminals nervous without raising his voice. He reviewed the documentation silently. Attempted access via misrepresentation of corporate beneficiary, he said. That crosses a line. Is it chargeable? I asked. He didn't answer immediately, that's Daniel's style. Silence forces clarity. It strengthens what we already have, he said finally. Intent matters. Intent, that word carries weight in federal court. Lucia understood that. She didn't just document what Adrian did in the past. She predicted what he would try in the future. Naomi turned her laptop toward me. If this proceeds, the article shifts from pattern to prosecution. The headline draft had changed. It no longer centered on inheritance. It centered on attempted financial manipulation after a documented legal withdrawal. Adrian believed he could outtalk consequences. He never understood systems. That was always his weakness. I sat back and remembered something Lucia told me during her second round of chemotherapy. She was pale but alert, laptop balanced on her knees. Mom, she said, men like him escalate when cornered, not because they're brave. Because they're addicted to control. I had asked her then, and what do you do with someone addicted to control? She answered without looking up from her screen. You remove unpredictability. You make every move cost something. Back in the present, Daniel closed the folder. We don't move yet, he said. We wait. Waiting is difficult for people who equate action with power, but I spent decades running a public school. I know systems, I know investigations. You don't rush exposure, you let behavior confirm itself. 3 hours later, Adrian called me. I let it ring twice before answering. Bella, he began, voice tight. There's been some misunderstanding with a financial intermediary. There was no misunderstanding, I replied calmly. Silence, then a shift in tone. You're going too far. I haven't moved at all, I said. You did. His breathing sharpened. You think you can bury me? There it was, not apology, not accountability, fear disguised as accusation. No, I said evenly. You're very capable of digging on your own. He hung up without another word. That afternoon, Naomi received confirmation that the holding company used in the access attempt had prior connections to 2 disputed tax filings from 3 years ago. The pattern was tightening. Talia forwarded an internal alert from Lucia's trust architecture. Red Protocol had automatically encrypted secondary accounts and triggered conditional release documents. I opened the secure folder again that night. There was one file I had not watched yet, labeled simply, If he escalates. I pressed play. Lucia appeared again, thinner, but her eyes were sharper than ever. Mom, she began, if he attempts indirect access, that means he hasn't learned. It also means he believes you won't press forward. She paused briefly. Press forward. My daughter always chose words deliberately. I built 3 layers, she continued. Layer 1, legal denial. Layer 2, media exposure. Layer 3, federal referral package auto-release. I felt my spine straighten. Auto-release. She had coded it into existence. If a second financial attempt occurred within 30 days of the first, encrypted documentation would transmit to Daniel's office without manual approval. No hesitation, no debate. Lucia had removed emotion from justice. Daniel called at 9:43 p.m. It triggered, he said simply. The referral package is complete. Adrian didn't know yet. He thought he was still maneuvering in shadow. He thought cleverness could outrun architecture, but architecture doesn't chase, it waits, and then it closes. The next morning, federal inquiry paperwork was filed quietly. No press release. No drama. Systems move without spectacle. By noon, Adrian's third attorney had withdrawn representation. By 3:00 p.m., Naomi received confirmation that multiple financial institutions were freezing associated accounts pending review. And by evening, Adrian Castillo finally understood something he had never respected. Predictability is power. He called again. This time his voice didn't carry charm, it carried something smaller. Bella, what have you done? I looked at Lucia's framed photo on the bookshelf. She wasn't smiling widely in that picture, she was thinking. I didn't do anything, I said softly. You triggered it. That is the lesson for every woman watching this. When you build boundaries properly, you don't have to enforce them loudly. Systems enforce themselves. Adrian thought he was negotiating with a grieving mother. He was negotiating with a structure designed by a cybersecurity prodigy who had nothing left to fear. What he still doesn't know, what he hasn't been told, is that Daniel Hargrove doesn't open investigations to intimidate. He opens them to finish. And when the official notice arrives at Adrian's door, it won't ask for conversation. It will ask for explanation. The official notice arrived at 8:17 a.m. on a Thursday. I know the time because I was watering the lavender lucia planted along the walkway the year her company turned profitable. She said it reminded her that growth requires patience. 2 federal agents stepped onto my porch. Calm, professional, they weren't there for me, they were there to confirm receipt of materials connected to the Morneau Foundation Trust structure. Daniel Hargrove had moved from quiet preparation to formal action, and once Daniel moves formally, he does not step backward. Mrs. Morneau, one agent said respectfully, this is confirmation of an active investigation involving Adrian Castillo. Hearing his full name in that tone felt different. Less personal, more procedural, that is what accountability does. It removes emotion from consequence. I signed the acknowledgement calmly, former principal. I've signed disciplinary forms, termination notices, policy updates. Paperwork doesn't frighten me, it clarifies. An hour later, Adrian called again. This time there was no charm left in his voice. Bella, he said, breath uneven, federal agents showed up at my apartment. I did not respond immediately. Silence used properly invites confession. They froze my accounts, he continued. They're asking about transfers from 5 years ago. Of course they are. Daniel doesn't open a file to ask about yesterday. He opens it to map patterns. You said this would stop if I withdrew, Adrian said. That sentence told me everything. He still believed consequences were negotiable. The inheritance matter stopped, I replied evenly. The investigation is separate. You set me up, he snapped. There it was again, blame as reflex. No, I said quietly. You operated for years assuming no one was studying you. He hung up again. Men like Adrian always end conversations when they lose control of them. By noon, Naomi Reed had confirmation from 3 financial institutions that subpoenas were active. Naomi doesn't chase rumors, she verifies. It's moving faster than I expected, she told me. Daniel must have had more pre-existing documentation than we realized. I thought back to Lucia sitting in her hospital room, laptop open, IV line in her arm. She wasn't just building a contingency, she was building inevitability. That afternoon, I met with Talia Brooks at the foundation office. Talia has a steadiness that comes from surviving what breaks others. Are we secure? I asked her. She nodded. Lucia structured the trust so none of this touches the scholarship pipeline. Funds are locked, audited, untouchable. That word untouchable felt like armor. 17 years ago, I feared instability. Today, I understand structure. That is the lesson I want every woman listening to hear. Independence is not loud, it is organized. At 4:30 p.m., Daniel called. His voice was unchanged, calm, precise. He attempted to delete financial records from a secondary account, he said. Digital forensics recovered them. I closed my eyes briefly. Adrian still believed in erasing instead of correcting. What happens now? I asked. Grand jury review, Daniel replied. No drama, no threat, just process. That evening I sat in Lucia's old study. The house no longer felt hollow. It felt deliberate. I opened her final handwritten journal. She didn't write daily reflections. She wrote observations. One entry caught my eye. Desperation accelerates exposure. That was dated 3 weeks before she passed. She had known. She had calculated Adrian's response curve. She had predicted the second move. And the third. The next morning, headlines didn't explode. That's television. Real investigations unfold quietly. But by afternoon, Adrian's 4th attorney withdrew representation. That is what patterns do, they isolate. Adrian showed up at my door just before sunset, not in a tailored suit, not rehearsed, just shaken. I opened the door but did not invite him inside. Boundaries matter. Bella, he said, voice cracking for the first time in 17 years, I didn't think it would go this far. There it is, not regret, not apology, miscalculation. It didn't go far, I said gently. It went exactly where it was built to go. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. She planned all this? Yes, he swallowed. While she was sick, I held his gaze steadily. While she was dying, silence stretched between us. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something like comprehension in his eyes, not empathy, but understanding that he had underestimated the wrong woman. I never meant to hurt her, he said weakly. That sentence carried no weight. Intent does not erase impact. You meant to avoid inconvenience, I replied. That's different. He stood there, smaller than I remembered. Power stripped of illusion looks like that. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, you explain yourself to people who don't negotiate with charm. He left without another word. 2 weeks later, formal charges were filed. Identity manipulation, financial misrepresentation, interstate fraud review. Daniel doesn't overcharge, he charges precisely. Naomi's article went live the same day the indictment became public record. Not vindictive. Not theatrical, just documented, verified, structured. The narrative was not angry ex-wife seeks revenge. It was cybersecurity founders' predictive documentation exposes financial pattern. That difference matters. Talia called me that evening. Applications to the foundation doubled today, she said softly. Girls who read the article, they said it gave them courage. I felt something settle inside me. This was never about destroying Adrian. It was about preventing the next woman from being blindsided. That is the difference between revenge and protection. Adrian believed he could outtalk consequences. He believed that because for years, no one required him to produce receipts. Lucia required receipts, systems required receipts, and when systems require receipts, stories collapse. The court date is set for next month. Daniel says the evidence is strong. Adrian is negotiating plea terms now. Negotiating, finally, in a room where charm is irrelevant. But here is what he still does not understand. Prison is not the real loss. The real loss happened 17 years ago when he chose to sign away a daughter for $300. And no plea agreement can rewrite that choice. In the next part, I will tell you what happened in court, and the moment Adrian realized that even if he reduced his sentence, he could not reduce the truth Lucia left behind. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Accountability has a temperature. It strips away performance. I sat in the second row behind the prosecution table while Daniel Hargrove, Lucia's federal prosecutor, reviewed final plea terms with the judge. Adrian Castillo, my ex-husband and Lucia's biological father, stood at the defense podium in a gray suit that no longer fit the man wearing it. Bankruptcy had shrunk more than his bank accounts. He didn't look at me when he entered. He didn't look at Talia Brooks, who sat beside me representing Lucia's foundation. He didn't look at Naomi Reed either, seated quietly with a legal pad, not as a reporter today, but as a witness to truth unfolding. He kept his eyes on Daniel. Men like Adrian only measure themselves against other men in authority. They forget who built the evidence. I folded my hands calmly in my lap, former principal. I have watched boys become men in rooms like this. Character is revealed when no one is watching, but in a courtroom everyone is watching and character still shows. The plea agreement was read aloud. Multiple counts of financial manipulation, fraud across state lines, identity misuse, structured deception, reduced from the original scope because he agreed to cooperate and provide restitution documentation. Cooperation. The word sounded generous. It wasn't. It meant the evidence was airtight. Daniel doesn't bluff. He builds cases that make bluffing irrelevant. When the judge asked Adrian how he pled, his voice cracked slightly. Guilty, Your Honor, not sorry. Guilty, there's a difference. Naomi glanced down at her notes. She understands narrative warfare. The story today was not fallen businessman. It was documented predator. Language matters. I thought about Lucia in her hospital bed, laptop balanced against thin knees, saying quietly, if someone betrays you, study them. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't confronted. She had studied. And study turns emotion into leverage. The prosecutor summarized the investigative findings. 7 layered accounts. Patterned financial entry into vulnerable households. Rotating jurisdictions to avoid detection. Daniel's voice never rose. Calm, surgical. He doesn't need volume, he uses structure. Adrian's attorney, his third in 6 months, attempted a final mitigation argument. My client experienced financial distress and poor decision-making under pressure. I almost smiled. Pressure does not create character, it reveals it. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Castillo, you terminated parental rights to avoid paying child support 17 years ago. You then engaged in a repeated pattern of financial exploitation. That is not distress, that is design. Design, the word landed heavily, because design requires intent. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. For the first time since I met him at 27, he looked unsure of his charm. When the judge invited victim statements, Talia stood. My daughter helped her once. Now she runs the Lucia Morno Foundation. Fiercely loyal, steady. Your Honor, she said, voice clear, Lucia Morno built systems to protect people from men like Adrian Castillo. Even while dying, she made sure documentation existed so no one else would have to question their own reality. I felt my throat tighten. Not from grief, from pride. Talia continued, this isn't revenge, this is prevention. Prevention, that is the word people misunderstand. Women are often accused of overreacting when we prepare. We are not overreacting, we are forecasting. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I stood slowly. Adrian Castillo is my former husband and Lucia's biological father, I began. 17 years ago, he signed papers choosing financial convenience over responsibility. I did not come here today for anger, I came for accuracy. The room quieted. Lucia did not spend her final months seeking punishment, she spent them documenting truth. There is a difference. I looked directly at Adrian for the first time. You believed you could outtalk consequences, you believed systems would not catch up, you believed charm was currency. My voice remained even. But systems, when built correctly, do not respond to charm, they respond to data. I sat down. Daniel did not look at me, but I saw the smallest nod. Respect, not sympathy, respect. The judge reviewed the plea terms one final time. 48 months federal incarceration. Financial restitution schedule. Asset liquidation review. Mandatory financial conduct monitoring upon release. 4 years. Some people in the gallery exhaled sharply. Naomi kept writing. Talia squeezed my hand once. Adrian closed his eyes. But here is what most people don't understand. Prison is visible consequence. The real sentence happened long ago. The real sentence was the day he signed away a daughter for $300. No appeal can overturn that decision. The gavel struck. Case closed, just like that. Adrian was escorted out through the side door. He hesitated once, as if expecting someone to stop the process. No one did. That is what adulthood looks like. No one interrupts your consequences. Outside the courthouse, Naomi approached me. The article goes live tonight, she said. It's centered on Lucia's documentation strategy, not him. Good. The focus remains where it belongs. Talia checked her phone. We've already had 12 new scholarship inquiries since the hearing started. 12 girls somewhere reading about structure. About foresight, about quiet strength. This is the part I want every woman listening to understand. Closure does not arrive with noise, it arrives with clarity. That evening I returned home alone. The house felt steady, not hollow, not heavy. Steady, I sat at Lucia's old desk and opened her final encrypted folder, one Daniel had cleared for release after sentencing. Inside was a short video labeled After. I hesitated before pressing play. Lucia appeared on screen, thin. Bald from treatment, eyes sharp as ever. Mom, she said softly, if you're watching this, it means the system worked. I covered my mouth. She continued, don't let this become about him. Let it become about them, the girls who need structure. The women who need to know documentation is power. Don't let anger grow where discipline can build. The video ended there, no dramatic goodbye, just instruction. Always strategic, always forward-facing. I sat back in the chair and whispered, it worked, Lucia. But something inside me shifted, because justice, while satisfying, leaves a quiet space afterward. A space where you ask yourself what comes next. And the truth is, next is bigger than prison. Next is legacy. And in the next part of this story, I'm going to tell you what happened when Adrian tried one final move from inside prison, one he thought no one would detect, and how Lucia predicted even that. I used to tell my teachers that discipline doesn't end when the bell rings. Character is revealed when no one is watching. What I didn't realize is that prison doesn't change character either. It only removes the audience. 3 months into Adrian Castillo's sentence, I received a certified letter from the Bureau of Prisons. Not emotional, not dramatic, procedural. It informed me that an external complaint had been filed alleging financial misconduct within the Lucia Morno Foundation. I read that sentence twice, slowly. Then I smiled, not because it was amusing, but because it was predictable. Adrian had made his final move from prison. The complaint claimed that funds allocated through Lucia's scholarship trust had been improperly redirected and that I, as beneficiary trustee, was mismanaging philanthropic capital. The language was legal, but not sophisticated. Adrian always believed sounding official was the same as being credible. I called Daniel Hargrove immediately. "He's attempting leverage," Daniel said calmly after reviewing the copy I scanned to him. "Inmates sometimes file external complaints hoping to trigger audits that create pressure." "Will it work?" I asked. Silence for a moment, not hesitation, assessment. "Only if there's something to find," Daniel replied. "That's what I appreciated about him. He doesn't soothe, he evaluates." "There isn't," I said evenly. "I know," he responded. "Then let him bury himself." I hung up and sat at Lucia's desk. My daughter had once told me, if someone betrays you, study them. She never said retaliate, she said study. And Adrian's pattern was simple: when cornered, he creates distraction. When powerless, he creates noise. When exposed, he tries to drag others into confusion. But here's what he never understood: systems don't respond to noise, they respond to records. I called Talia Brooks, who now runs the foundation Lucia built. "We're about to be audited," I told her. She didn't panic. She didn't sigh. She simply said, "All files are current. Independent audits are already uploaded. Every disbursement is traceable." That's what loyalty looks like when paired with competence. Talia wasn't defensive. She was ready. By afternoon, Naomi Reed called. "Investigative journalists have instincts the way teachers do." "He filed a complaint," she said before I could speak. "Yes, he's trying to shift the narrative from fraud to persecution." Naomi's voice sharpened slightly. "He wants sympathy. Will he get it?" I asked. Naomi exhaled softly. "Not from anyone who reads documents." That evening, I opened Lucia's encrypted archive, the one Naomi helped organize months before sentencing. I wasn't searching for evidence. I was searching for foresight, and there it was. A subfolder labeled Escalation Phase 4. I stared at it for a long moment before clicking. Inside was a short memo Lucia had drafted a year before her death. "If Adrian is prosecuted," it read, "expect secondary disruption attempts directed at the foundation. His behavioral pattern indicates reputational retaliation when legal routes fail." She had mapped it. Even prison strategy. Attached to the memo was a structural reinforcement plan. Pre-authorized independent audit, external transparency report schedule, media briefing outline prepared by Naomi, and federal compliance contacts already documented. I leaned back in the chair. My daughter did not prepare for justice. She prepared for backlash. That is the difference between intelligence and wisdom. 2 weeks later, the formal audit began. Financial investigators reviewed every grant, every transfer, every scholarship allocation. Talia sat with them for hours, answering questions without defensiveness. Former abandoned child, now foundation director, fiercely loyal, fiercely capable. When you build something correctly, scrutiny doesn't threaten it, it strengthens it. Adrian, meanwhile, began contacting minor news outlets from prison, claiming he was a target of a coordinated character attack. Naomi intercepted that narrative before it could grow. She didn't publish an attack piece. She released documentation, transparent numbers, verified audits, Lucia's original structural design. Narrative warfare isn't about yelling louder, it's about presenting facts before fiction spreads. One evening, Daniel called again. "The audit will close in your favor," he said. "No findings. In fact, they've recommended the foundation as a compliance model." I felt something steady inside me, not triumph, confirmation. "What about Adrian's complaint?" I asked. Daniel paused slightly. "Filing knowingly false financial allegations during incarceration can affect parole review." There it was. His final move would cost him time. Again, character is revealed when no one is watching. And Adrian believed no one could see him from prison. He forgot about digital trails. He forgot about paper trails, he forgot about pattern analysis, but Lucia didn't forget. A month later, I received another official notice. The complaint was dismissed. The foundation was formally commended for structural transparency. Adrian's parole eligibility review was delayed pending conduct evaluation. He had attempted one last manipulation and extended his own confinement. Naomi came by the house that evening. We sat at the kitchen table where Lucia once debugged encryption flaws. He underestimated her, Naomi said quietly. He underestimated you, I replied. Naomi shook her head. No, he underestimated documentation. We both knew that was the truth. Later that night, I walked through the Foundation's annual impact report: 83 scholarship recipients, 12 therapy partnerships, 4 states adopting Lucia's encryption model in public hospitals. Adrian thought prison was the end of this story. He never realized he was a footnote. But here is what stayed with me most. Lucia's memo ended with a sentence I hadn't noticed before. Mom understands systems, she wrote. She will know what to do. I closed the file slowly. For 17 years, I believed I was protecting my daughter. I did not realize she was building protection for me. Adrian made one final move thinking no one would see it. But when you raise a woman to observe quietly, think structurally, and document precisely, she sees everything. And in the final part of this story, I'm going to tell you what happened on the anniversary of Lucia's death, when something arrived in the mail that Adrian never expected, and it changed the meaning of justice entirely. On the first anniversary of Lucia's death, I woke before sunrise. Grief doesn't knock politely on anniversaries. It arrives fully formed, sits at the edge of your bed, and reminds you that love leaves echoes. I made coffee and sat at the same kitchen table where my daughter once sketched encryption models while IV medication dripped into her arm. Even sick, she thought in systems. Even tired, she thought ahead. At 8:12 a.m., the doorbell rang. Certified mail. I signed for it calmly, former principal. Paperwork has never intimidated me. But when I saw the return address, Federal Bureau of Prisons, I felt the smallest tightening in my chest. Adrian Castillo, my ex-husband, Lucia's biological father, the man who believed he could outtalk consequences, the man who learned too late that documentation speaks louder. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single letter, handwritten, no lawyer, no official header, just ink. Bella, it began, not Mrs. Morneau, not Isabella, Bella. He was reaching backward for familiarity. I know I don't deserve a response. I know I forfeited that years ago. I've had a lot of time to think. Prison does that. It removes distraction. It leaves you alone with your pattern. He wrote about the silence of his cell. About men who bragged about crimes they hadn't yet processed. About realizing that charm doesn't work when the only audience is concrete. He wrote that he had watched the Foundation's annual report from the prison library computer, the public version Naomi had helped release. He saw Lucia's name on scholarships. He saw Talia Brooks' interview about rebuilding broken trust. He saw that the systems he once mocked were now stronger than he ever was. Then came the line that made me pause. She studied me better than I ever studied myself. I read that sentence 3 times. Because it was the first honest thing he had written in 17 years. He admitted he filed the false complaint out of anger. He admitted he hoped to cause disruption. He admitted he underestimated Lucia's foresight. But here's what struck me most. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for legal help. He asked one question. Did she ever hate me? I sat back in the chair. That is what prison does. It strips you down to the question you should have asked decades earlier. I didn't answer immediately. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. Then I walked to Lucia's study and opened her encrypted archive one last time. Not because I needed evidence, because I needed perspective. In a folder labeled Personal After, there was a document I had not opened before. A simple text file, no attachments, no legal structures, just Lucia's words. If he ever asks whether I hated him, she wrote, tell him no, hate requires emotional investment. I invested in building something better. I closed my eyes. That was my daughter, not bitter, strategic, focused forward. I returned to the kitchen table and began to write my response. Adrian, I wrote, not Bella, not anything nostalgic. Just Adrian. Lucia did not hate you. She studied you. There is a difference. Hate traps you in someone else's shadow. Study frees you from it. I told him the foundation now supports over 100 students. I told him Talia, once a child abandoned by another man like him, now runs operations with precision and compassion. I told him Naomi's book about Lucia's cybersecurity legacy is being used in university ethics courses. I told him Daniel Hargrove's office referenced Lucia's documentation model in a training seminar for young prosecutors. I did not mention forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a performance. It is a private discipline. Instead, I wrote the truth. You believed power came from persuasion. Lucia believed power came from preparation. That is why her name is building futures while yours is serving a sentence. I paused before the final paragraph. Then I wrote what I have come to understand at 64 years old. Character is revealed when no one is watching. Prison removed your audience. What you do with that is your responsibility. I sealed the envelope without rereading it. Some words do not need editing. When I dropped the letter in the mail slot, I felt something unexpected. Not closure. Closure is a myth. I felt completion. Later that afternoon, I joined Talia at the community center for the annual Lucia Morno Foundation Scholarship Ceremony. The room was full, young women in pressed dresses, parents holding tissues. Naomi stood near the back, recording not for headlines but for archive. Documentation matters. Talia stepped to the podium. Lucia Morno believed that if someone betrays you, you study them, she said, and then you build something that makes betrayal irrelevant. Applause filled the room. I looked at the faces of the girls seated in the front row, some nervous, some determined, all watching. I thought about the woman I was 17 years ago working double shifts, wondering how to shield my daughter from abandonment. I thought about the woman I am now, steady, not bitter, not hardened. Strong because I understand systems. Strong because I understand that preparation is not paranoia, it is protection. As the final scholarship recipient stepped forward, I felt my phone vibrate. A notification, public records update. Adrian Castillo's appeal for sentence reduction denied. I didn't show it to anyone. I simply placed the phone face down on the table. Justice no longer required my attention. Legacy did. That night I returned home alone. The house was quiet but not empty. I walked into Lucia's study one last time and turned off the desk lamp she used to leave on during late-night coding sessions. You won, I whispered. Not because Adrian went to prison. Not because his complaints failed. She won because she refused to let betrayal define her architecture. She turned trauma into intelligence. She turned abandonment into structure. She turned silence into documentation. And I learned something every woman listening needs to hear. You cannot control who leaves. You cannot control who disappoints you. But you can control what you build next. Build wisely. Document carefully. Love fiercely. And never underestimate the quiet power of a woman who studies before she speaks. That was the letter Adrian never expected. Not the one I sent him. The one Lucia wrote with her life.